Time for chapter 25. So we are now switching to the digestive system, and then for chapter 26, we'll start with the nutrition. So focusing more on the food that we eat and how we use those nutrients from that food. So first we're going to focus on just generic anatomy, and then later in the chapter we'll talk about the different organs and how they actually do their jobs. So our digestive system, again, we're going to process the food, so break it down so that we can extract out the nutrients, and then any residue that's left over that we don't absorb, that gets just eliminated. So there are 5 stages of digestion. First one is ingestion, so we actually take food into the body, so eating. There's actual digestion, so breaking down the food in a form enough, small enough where we're able to absorb it, leading to our next stage of absorption, so uptake of our nutrient molecules, so bringing it into our bloodstream from the digestive system. Then compaction, so whatever we didn't absorb, we have to take all that waste, we compact it down so it makes it easier to get rid of that waste. So a lot of that's going to be absorbing water. And then our last stage is defecation, so eliminating the feces, so eliminating the waste or anything that we just didn't absorb in our digestive system processes. So we have 2 different types of digestion. We have mechanical and chemical. For mechanical digestion, think of is physically breaking down your food into smaller particles. So this happens in the mouth with the cutting and grinding action of the teeth. So our teeth moving around food, breaking up into smaller and smaller bits. So physically, basically pounding our food into smaller pieces. As well as the churning action of the stomach and small intestine. So we do have smooth muscle in both our stomach and large intestines, and that muscle will contract and move the food around and therefore helps to physically break up our food. So the importance of mechanical digestion is to expose more food surface to digestive enzyme. So at the bottom in our little picture, we can see a big chunk of food, and the enzymes, which are little blue dots, they can only do so much work on a big chunk of food. So with the help of my mechanical digestion, we take our big chunk of food, break it down into smaller bits, allowing for more surface area to be exposed to the digestive enzymes so that our food can be broken down into a small enough size that it can be absorbed into the cells. For chemical digestion, this is digestion involving our actual enzymes. So we're taking our larger molecules that have been broken down, get them down to a liquid form, and then we use hydrolysis reactions. So hydrolysis as in lysis, so that's to break up, and we're using water to break up these reactions. So we're going to add water to break down macromolecules into our monomers. So remembering, monomers are the building blocks for larger molecules. Now, not all of what we take into the body has to be actually digested and broken down. Some of our nutrients can actually be absorbed directly from what we take in. So vitamins that way, amino acids, so they're already in their monomer building block stage. Our minerals, cholesterol, and water are all able to be immediately absorbed when we get to. You can do some in the stomach, but most of your absorption of nutrients is going to happen in your small intestines. So for our larger molecules that are not yet into an absorbable form, we have to use chemical digestion to break it down into our monomer building block. So on this side, we have a larger macromolecule. So our enzyme is going to work on breaking the bond between our monomer building blocks. So we're using hydrolysis, or you can use water. We're adding water to our molecule to break the bond between our monomer building blocks so that we now have an absorbable form. So our monomers, you can take those individual pieces and absorb them into the cell. So there are specific enzymes that will carry out our chemical digestion. And by the way, going back to our respiratory and digestive lab exam, this will be on it. So carbohydrates, the general category for breaking down our carbohydrates, so like breads, starches, that kind of stuff, sugars, is amylase, so amyl as in for something sweet. So we take our polysaccharides, so many saccharides or many sugars, and break it down to disaccharides, so di meaning two, and then those disaccharides are broken down into monosaccharides. So with our liver, whatever our monosaccharide is, depending on whatever we've eaten, eventually it's going to get converted into glucose, and then we can use that glucose to make ATP. We also can use other molecules to do that, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, for protein, so we have two different enzymes for protein. We have pepsin, which works in the stomach at a pH of about 2, so it's specifically designed to work in the acidic environment of the stomach. We also have proteases, which are ACE for enzyme, and it's breaking down our proteins. So we are going to go from proteins into polypeptides, so many of our little amino acids stuck together into our amino acid building blocks, so our little monomers. Then the last one for our lipids. So with lipids, because they are hydrophobic and they're not easily mixed well in the aqueous or watery environment of our digestive system, then we have to take our larger fat globules and break them down into smaller pieces so that our enzymes can finally get to that. So part of how we do that is we use bile. So that is created in the liver and stored in the gallbladder. When the fats that we have eaten have moved from the stomach into our small intestines, the bile is also added from our gallbladder, so the gallbladder just releases the stored bile. That bile helps to break up our bigger chunks of fat into smaller ones. So our fats get broken down into emulsification droplets, so that's using the bile. And then the lipase enzyme is going to break down our emulsification droplets into monoglycerides and fatty acids. So remembering from our triglycerides, chapter 2, talking about that molecule. So we have fatty acids, we stick them to 3 fatty acids, we stick them to a glycerol molecule. So when we break down a lipid, we take off 2 of the fatty acids and we still have 1 fatty acid stuck to a glyceride, and that's what a monoglyceride is. We'll also break down, we have enzymes to break down our nucleic acids into nucleotides, since a lot of what we're eating are cells, and those cells still have nuclei, and so those nuclei still contain DNA, so we got to break those down as well. So we do break our nucleic acids of whatever we've eaten down into nucleotides. But that's not really, well, at least important for my class, at least. Okay, so let's look at our major anatomical structures of the digestive system. So I'm actually going to go to this next one. So in our digestive system, we start off from the mouth, and we have kind of a continuous long tubing structure to get all the way out from the mouth to the anus. So for both your exam 8 as well as your respiratory and digestive lab exam, you will be labeling some of these same structures on your lab exam as well. So I kept the same picture, even though you have a few respiratory items that you'll label on that lab exam as well. Okay, so here is your word bank in alphabetical order of the pieces and parts. I'm actually just going to go through the flow of how food's going to move through your body and cover these as we go along. So first one, we enter food into our mouth. And then as we swallow, we move into the pharynx region. So that's an area that is shared between our nasal cavity and oral cavity before going on to our esophagus. Also mentioned here is the parotid salivary gland. So that's one of our saliva glands that's going to release saliva that helps with breaking down our food. So parotid salivary gland, going down to our esophagus. Just double checking. Okay, cool. So all the way down to our esophagus, here is our stomach, and hiding behind that we have our pancreas, and on this side we have the liver, and the green thing, the gallbladder. So once our stomach turns our food into a liquid format, then that liquid gets moved into our small intestines, as well as the input from the gallbladder and the pancreas going into our small intestine in our first section of it. So after you finish off in the small intestines, then the waste product goes to the large intestine. So here is the appendix. So there's a bunch of white blood cells that are hanging out there. What reason? We don't know, other than maybe just as kind of a additional area of protection, since technically your large intestine is exposed to the outside environment. Just a really long way of doing it, but whatever. Okay, so appendix there. Then we have our ascending colon, our transverse colon, our descending colon, sigmoid, so there's your curve, and then moving over into your rectum and then anus. And I believe I got everything. Yep, okay, got everything. Okay, cool. So that is the labeling that you'll do both on exam 8 and for your respiratory and digestive lab exam. Okay, so these are your layers of your digestive tract. So we do have a mucosal layer, we do have a muscle layer, we do have our connective tissue layer. Now in the test, I'm going to keep skipping. All right, so in our digestive system, we don't have to think about telling our stomach to do its job, telling our small intestines to do its job. So that is a part of our autonomic functioning. So the nervous system that controls our digestive system is the enteric nervous system. And it can work independently of our central nervous system, even though there is communication between our digestive system and our brain, helping us to know when we're hungry, when we are full, all these different kinds of signals that will communicate between the two. But the enteric nervous system is going to control the movement of food throughout our digestive tract, our secretion of, for example, like our stomach acid, our different hormones, helping to control that, helping to control blood flow. So as we're digesting, we need to increase blood flow to the digestive system so that we have good blood flow for picking up nutrients. And because we can't consciously control this nervous system, it is considered part of our autonomic nervous system. So just a different little arm, and its only function is focusing on the digestive system. Okay, so this is just showing you the different pathways off that enteric nervous system. That's not on the test, so I'm going to skip it. Okay, same thing with the mesentery. So if you remember from chapter 1, we talked about our different sections of the body, and they have connective tissue around them. So in your stomach, intestines, abdominal region, you do have your mesenteries. They just kind of, they're like suspenders. They keep everything in place. Nope, skipping this, not on the test. Okay, so with our digestive tract, in order to communicate to the body what's going on, particularly to your brain, as well as to the other members of our digestive system, we have two different types of chemical messengers. So the first one are the hormones. So remembering what hormones are, they are secreted into the bloodstream, and then they're able to go around the body. Okay. So with some of our hormones, they're going to tell the brain what's going on with the function of our digestive system. You have insulin that gets released from the pancreas, telling our cells, hey, some amino acids and some sugar, particularly glucose, is coming your way, so get ready to absorb them. So there's a lot of signaling going on, so it's not just, oh, we digested the food and we put all these nutrients in the blood supply and hopefully everyone will get the message. No, we actually actively communicate to the rest of our body. The other type of secretion is a paracrine secretion, so this is just very nearby certain areas as we're focusing on specific functions inside of our digestive system. So just in whatever area is active at the moment. Okay, so once we start taking food into the mouth, of course, our mouth is going to help start breaking that down. And there's a whole section that I skipped because it's not on the test. So we're actually just going to go in to start digestion. And our first one is chewing. So inside the mouth, we have a form of mechanical digestion. And again, that's going to expose more surface area to our digestive enzymes. So we got a bunch of muscles, tongue moving around stuff. We have the muscles around the jaw and sides of the head and help to move the jaw and help to grind up our food. So this helps us with our first step in mechanical digestion. So our first ability to break down food into a smaller piece. So also in the mouth, we have saliva, and there's a bunch of stuff in saliva. And so therefore it actually helps a lot of our digestive system function. So starts our fat begins the starch and fat digestion. So there's enzymes in there that help with starting to break down stuff, inhibits bacterial growth. So we'll talk about like the pH of it, as well as with the antibodies, help dissolve molecules again. So that's going to help to make stuff into smaller and smaller pieces. So some stuff is hydrophobic, it'll dissolve in water, and that helps with our stimulating our taste buds. And then eventually, right before we swallow it, all of the liquid portion of our saliva will help to bind the food together into what's called the bolus. So that's the form it's going to be right before you swallow it. So this just allows for kind of a smooth package as you enter in your pharynx. So inside your saliva, it is hypotonic. So it's going to have some solutes, but not as much as a regular cell. So stuff that's in your saliva, we have our enzymes, salivary amylase, so ACE enzyme to break down amyl, so it's just a word for sweet, and it's in the saliva, so that's just kind of our word for it. So there's other enzymes, like for example, if it's coming from the pancreas, then it's pancreatic. So we have different labeling based on where that enzyme's actually working. Another one is lingual lipase, so lingual as in referring to the tongue, and lipase, ACE for enzyme, LIP, lip for lipid. So it's going to help to break down the fats. So also in our saliva, we have mucus that helps to kind of moisten stuff for swallowing. Lysozyme that helps going to kill bacteria. Immunoglobulin A, it's one of your antibodies, help to prevent bacterial growth. We also have some electrolytes. And we have a fairly neutral pH for our saliva. So with these enzymes, those actually work in a neutral pH. However, for pepsin, it works at a pH of around 2. So it works best in the acidic environment of the stomach. Okay, so that's nonsense. So I'm going to skip it. Okay, so we've chewed our food up. It is now bound together in a bolus. So let's swallow. So as we swallow, we're going to move into the pharynx region of our digestive system. So again, it's an area shared by our oral and nasal cavity. So that's where you could have your choking risk, because same part there, air comes in, same thing that drink and food comes in. So you're in this shared space where you have to guide making sure that your food doesn't get into your air tubes. So in our pharynx, we do have what's called pharyngeal constrictors that are going to help to move the food back towards our esophagus and helps to move food downward during swallowing. So as we swallow, we go into our esophagus. There is an opening in our diaphragm that allows it to pass through from our chest to our more abdomen region. So that esophageal hiatus, just like you had the aortic hiatus, just an opening in the diaphragm to allow those tubes to go through. Then there's also a sphincter muscle that's going to open and close, regulating what can go into the stomach. So this is the muscle that is non-functioning in some people who have heartburn, because that muscle is around that opening to the stomach. And if it's open, then it can allow for the acidic acid of the stomach to splash up into your esophagus. So that muscle should keep the stomach acid from eroding your esophagus, but if not, then that's partially how you end up with heartburn. Okay, so with swallowing, it's a bunch of different muscles helping to guide your food into your actual esophagus. And there is a pattern of how these muscles move. So there is a center in your spinal cord, the medulla oblongata portion, that's going to coordinate the movement of these muscles. So we have 3 phases of swallowing. Then we have our oral, our pharyngeal, and our esophageal. So based on where are you? So oral for the mouth, pharyngeal for the pharynx, and esophageal for the esophagus. So the first phase is the oral phase. This is the only one that's under voluntary control. So this is where we actually tell our muscles in order to move that bolus back towards the back of the throat and moving it towards our pharynx. So our tongue's going to push it backwards. Our food goes in front of the epiglottis. The epiglottis is then going to tip over to close off our trachea, so prevent food from going into our trachea, or actually larynx specifically. And excuse me. And that helps to kind of provide a slide for your food to go down and towards the back to where your esophagus is. Second phase is the pharyngeal phase, so this is all involuntary. So this is where you just have this pattern or firing of these different muscles. The food is moved around to the back of the throat, you preventing food from re-entering the mouth or even entering the nasal cavity, so making sure everything is going down to your esophagus. We have muscles that are going to help to close off your larynx of your breathing system right before you get to the trachea. Vocal cords close up, epiglottis covers that opening, the esophagus widens, so normally it's kind of flat and closed off because it's not receiving anything. So this allows for the food to come in, and then the food bolus is pushed down by the set of muscles. Our last phase is our esophageal phase. So here we have these contractions called peristalsis. So it's an involuntary wave of muscular contraction that pushes the bolus ahead of it. So if you've ever eaten a Go-Gurt or just use toothpaste where you kind of squeeze and push and squeeze and push and squeeze and push. So that is how peristalsis works, where you squeeze and you push and you squeeze and you push to move the food down your esophagus and eventually getting to your stomach. So normally if you're sitting upright or standing, gravity is actually more efficient at moving the food down your esophagus, and so usually that will do its job versus having to use peristalsis. But if you are kind of chilling out on the couch and you're kind of leaned over or some version of laying down or not in an upright position, the peristalsis will make sure that your food is getting all the way down to the stomach regardless of your body position. So once you get to the lower end of the esophagus, again, we have that esophageal sphincter that is controlling what can go into the stomach. So it's going to have to relax in order to allow food to get into your stomach. Okay, so let's move it, what the stomach does in the next video, because we are a little over 20 minutes. So I will see you in the next one. See ya.